Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Spotlight with Scientists in School. I'm your host, Betty Bacopoulos, and today on the show, I am joined by Dr. Emily Choy. She is a postdoc fellow at McGill University, and she is studying climate change and the effects on seabirds and sentinel species like the beluga whale. When Emily is not scaling cliffsides in pursuit of the thick-billed murre, she is finding lost ships at sea. It's a conversation you don't want to miss, so let's head on over and meet Dr. Choy. Thank you so much for joining us. This is so fantastic. Thank you.
You're really welcome. Thanks for having me.
When I started researching you, there's just so many amazing projects that you're involved with that it was actually hard to decide where to start the interview. So I think we should just start at the beginning and tell me what you were like as a child. Did you love science when you were younger?
Yes, I did. So I've loved nature ever since I was a little kid. I'm from Markham, Ontario. And I grew up at my grandparents' cottage near Lake Simcoe, where I'd spend hours upon hours catching frogs, catching snakes, feeding chipmunks, like basically every day. So I've definitely loved nature ever since I was a little kid.
We're always telling kids to get outside. Once you start falling in love with nature, and like you said, the chipmunks, worms, dirt, getting in there, you realize that there's science everywhere. It fosters this love for exploring science.
Yes, no, the natural world is so fascinating. And just as a kid, I think there's just so much to explore that's really what got me into biology and science in general.
So you were a kid exploring things at your grandparents' cottage, but now after that, you are a postdoc fellow now at McGill University, and your research is climate change and seabirds. So tell me a little bit about your research.
I just happened to get into Arctic research from an opportunity during my master's. I actually did a master's on Devon Island, which is the place on Earth most like Mars on seabirds. And ever since then, I've stayed in Arctic research. So for murres, so one of the key aspects I'm interested in murres is that they're amazing divers. So they can dive up to about 200 meters in a matter of minutes, but they also fly several hours a day. And birds flying and diving are an energetic trade-off, and it's very difficult to do both. And a great example of this is the penguin, which is a amazing diver, but it's lost the ability to fly. But murres do both, but as a result, it's very difficult for them to fly. So they're one of many really amazing Arctic animals that really captured my interest. And my focus of my postdoc is looking at the impacts of climate change on thick-billed murres, so the impacts of warming temperatures on murres. As a cold adapted bird, they're very vulnerable to heat stress, but also the impacts of indirect effects of climate change on their energetics. So over the past 30 years on Coates Island, Hudson Bay, the diets of murres has shifted from about 50% Arctic cod to 50% capelin with the warming of Hudson Bay. And so one question I'm looking at is the impacts of this shift on their energetics as a bird with a very, very high energy demand because of their high cost of flight.
Now, I've seen part of your research. I've seen photos of you where you're actually measuring the size of the eggs. And though the eggs are very interesting, I hadn't noticed how pointed the tip of the egg is. The other thing I noticed is that these birds obviously leave a lot of their eggs on these cliffs. How do you manage to grab all these eggs that are on the cliffside? It looked so dangerous and exciting at the same time.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Well, before any of us go to Coates, we actually have rock climbing training. So
okay.
We have a climber with us who actually sets up. There's a nice, really secure and safe rope course that we use to do our work. And so when I'm measuring eggs, I'm obviously harnessed in and like attached to ropes. And so there's a very, very, low risk. And so we basically position ourselves on parts of the cliffs, and then we just basically sit and measure the eggs.
So I have this fantastic picture that you sent me, and I absolutely love it. I'm going to share it. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, it's this picture for many reasons. The joy on your face in that picture is absolutely amazing. And I do see all the ropes and the carabiners in that photo. So that's how you're tethered in, right? You're not going to fall off the cliff. Yeah. Tell me about that photo. Where was that taken and what was happening?
So that was taken at Coates Island, so on a cliff face of Coates Island. And at that time, we had just captured a murre and put on a little geolocator on its foot. So that basically will tell us the GPS location. we'd taken measurements of the bird and we basically marked it with a marker on its belly, just basically so we know which birds have been captured. So at that point, I'm just releasing the bird and it's flying off. And so
Oh, it's such a great photo. I absolutely love it. It just looks like you are just doing something that you love. It's captured such a great moment. I love it. Now, you also study of the effects of climate change on beluga whales. And I've heard you say that this is something that you are the most proud of.
Well, I'm most proud of the fact that it was a community-based monitoring project. So it was done in partnership with communities in the Inuvialuit Settlement Region. So Inuit communities. So beluga whales are an important traditional harvest. And so I worked tremendously with communities. I lived with communities and learned a lot about changes, the effects of climate change in the Beaufort region on beluga whales and the communities through my partnership with them. And so they had a lot of input on the science that went on, and I'm very proud of that.
Now, a lot of your research is in the Arctic. You're, Beaufort Sea, like you said, Nunavut, Hudson's Bay. What's it like working in the Arctic? What are some of the challenges, or what do you love the most about it?
Well, I mean, I love the most, it's just just breathtaking landscape. It's like something I've never seen before. And every place in the Arctic where I've worked has been different. Like I've worked on Devon Island, which is basically like a bit of a polar desert. There's, a bit of lichens and saxifrage, but not a lot of plant species, but a lot of, amazing, wildlife. Like I remember going up there and just seeing this Arctic fox family. And there was basically a mother fox with 9 kits, and every day she would just work, all day bringing back, seabird eggs and chicks to her kits. So that was amazing. And then working in the Beaufort region, there's a lot more pine trees, and there's grizzly bears, and again, another really breathtaking landscape, very different wildlife like moose. And then on Coates Island, where not only did I see lots of seabirds, but there was like a large walrus colony. Walrus, as well as beluga whales. So there's also a pod near Hudson Bay. So it's just very breathtaking, amazing landscape that you never see. It is very challenging. You can't really, it's a harsh environment, obviously the Arctic. You can't always control for the weather. We've had situations, I remember on Coates Island, we in 2019, we wanted to leave on August 10th, but because of poor weather, we had to leave on August 15th.
Right.
And so weather has always been a factor, along with other conditions. Polar bears, you can't work with those polar bears,
Yes.
safety concerns. So that's part of some of the challenges.
What about the cold? How do you deal with the cold? Like I'm thinking as a research scientist, you're always gathering stuff. You'd have to take your mitts and your gloves off. Is that a challenge?
Yes. So definitely on Coates Island, our season started, we arrived around mid-May and stayed till about August. Actually, no, not mid-May, June. But at that time in June, mid-June, there's still snow. It's still quite cold. In August and July, it gets to be about 18 degrees or cooler. So it's about, spring here. So it's not as much of a factor, but definitely when you're out working on birds where you need, your fine scale hand motor skills, you need lots of pairs of gloves just to keep warm so you don't get frostbite. So yes,
Right.
cold is a factor, particularly at night too. We're all there with our sleeping bags. We often have to heat our cabins. So yes, we have like our clothing, like what we bring with us. We bring basically every season, winter to
Right.
spring. And
yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, you'd have to plan for every season because you just don't know what you're going to get, right?
exactly.
Now, spending so much time in the Arctic, you've built some great relationships with the northern communities, and you're also involved with something called the Northern Inclusion Initiative. I really want to know more about this project. What's this about?
Well, it was an initiative that was launched at the Arctic Change Conference last year. So it was just to basically celebrate diversity, but also amplify voices within the Northern research community that are often underrepresented. In particular, Indigenous voices, who of course are so important to the Northern research community, and often don't get the chance because a lot of these conferences are held in the South to attend these conferences. So, we called for, it was basically a call for contributions on just the perspectives of underrepresented groups to Northern research. And we had a lot of just wonderful entries from community members and youth talking about, what are important aspects to Arctic research for them. And so it was just a really wonderful opportunity to bring these voices to the table and to share with them their perspectives on work in the North.
Right. And you've said that there's actually a lot of barriers, a lot of structural barriers for Indigenous people. How do we address them? How do we lift some of these barriers?
Well, I mean, I think that definitely increasing representation is an important first step. I also think that, drawing on, more connections with Indigenous voices, making sure that they have a say in terms of planning research. Like I think I was lucky or very privileged to be part of a community-based research project. And I think definitely community members need to be consulted on research going on in the North, which is their home. And I think that should be done on, expanded to, any project that takes place in the North.
Now, you said you've also have a really big interest in bridging the gap between Western science and traditional knowledge. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think as a PhD student, as a scientist, I think probably the most valuable information I received when I worked on the beluga whale community-based monitoring project was the information that the community members shared with me. They're basically their knowledge of, like, for instance, there was a major trend that was published by another scientist that showed that the beluga whales were getting smaller. Well, the communities have been saying the beluga whales are getting smaller for a while. And, just sharing with them or getting their input on important questions, such as what the belugas were eating, was very important as well. And so there's some of the work that I've been part of has actually tried to look at both science and traditional knowledge to see how they complement and how, they can work together. I've participated in a few co-authored publications that have kind of combined science with traditional knowledge to help basically enlighten issues in the North, such as the impacts of climate change on beluga whales and Arctic char. And I think definitely going forward, when we're addressing, complex issues such as climate change, we need to tap into the talent of knowledge of all communities, in particular Northern communities, to address these issues.
I think the next story is a fine example of this, and it's how you were a part of finding a lost ship at sea, right? Because it was knowledge from the local Northern communities that helped you find this. So I'm going to paint a little picture so everyone knows what we're talking about. So back in, what year was it? 1845, Sir John Franklin had an expedition, and there were two ships, Erebus and Terror, that came to the Arctic and were lost at sea. And I read that there were 165 attempts at trying to find one of these ships. And you were actually on one of the expeditions that found, was it Erebus? Did you find Erebus?
Erebus, yes.
Yes. And is it true that it was local knowledge that helped get you there to find that ship?
Yes. So one of the search sites that the expedition examined was based on what Northern communities had said about the Franklin ships, and it turned out they were right all along. It was basically in the north of Victoria Strait, and so they were right of where the ship was.
All along. So tell me, what was that expedition like? It was called the Weston Scientist Victoria Strait Expedition. What was it like, and how long did it take?
Oh, it was an amazing experience. So it lasted about approximately 10 days in 2014, from about the end of August to early September, and we basically traveled the Northwest Passage to the search area in Victoria Strait. So it was an amazing expedition with scientists from Parks Canada. There was the Arctic Research Foundation, the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, as well as the Weston Foundation and other well-known scientists as well. And so I came on board as a Weston scientist, Weston fellow. I was able to share some of my research in discussions on climate change, the impacts of beluga whales. I took part in kind of marine mammal surveys and wildlife surveys along the way. I mean, fortunately I didn't see any whales, but there were lots of polar bears. So it was still a very kind of a high ice year, and lots of seabirds as well. It was amazing. There was some difficulty getting there because it was a high ice year, so it was a bit of an adventure. But once we got there, unfortunately, we weren't the ship that found it, but we assisted in one of the search areas, and so it was quite an amazing experience just to see the whole search taking place with all of the technology.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. And since then, I've read they found the other ship has been found as well, right?
Yeah, yes.
And again, it was knowledge from the local northern communities that led them to the second ship.
Yeah.
So I was trying to think of a day in the life of Dr. Emily Choy, because you do so much. You have so much research under your belt. You're an active science communicator. I read that you also won ultimate Frisbee competition on a national level, and you also play instruments. You play the sax and the guitar. I'm going to ask you a few questions to see what it would be like on one of your days off. Would you choose summer or winter?
Summer. Oh,
even though you spend all your time in the Arctic?
Yes, I don't get to experience the summer here, so I'd probably choose summer.
City or countryside?
Countryside, definitely.
Hiking shoes or sandals?
Hiking shoes. I'm always hiking on my days off, so.
Yeah. A book or an ebook?
A book.
Yeah, me too. I cannot do the ebook versions just yet. Coffee or tea?
Tea, especially chai tea.
And is it acoustic or electric guitar?
Acoustic, campfire, definitely. I prefer acoustic guitar.
Would you have any advice for young kids who are looking to get into science?
Well, I would just say, go for it. I mean, there's so many, me as a kid, I just went and, explored my backyard. I know there's lots of great, conservation areas and parks around local neighborhoods. You just have to, if you don't have to look very far in order to find nature. And, if you're interested in something or, in wildlife, just, pursue your interest. There's so many opportunities right now to get involved, for instance, for birding. There's lots of really amazing science apps on, iPhones. There's lots of, amazing birding events. There's like the Christmas bird count and other events. So it's really, really easy today to get involved. You just have to go out and do it if you want. That's what you want.
You got to put on those hiking boots and get out there.
Yeah, just get out there and have a great time. Have a blast.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Choy. This has been fascinating. Thank you. I wish you continued success.
Oh, thank you. You're very welcome.